In the backdrop of the G20 summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Joe Biden met for a bilateral yesterday, and there was a comprehensive joint statement by both the countries. One of the very interesting points about these statements were the recalibration of the Quad grouping, and also as India looks to host the 2024 Quad conclave, we are joined by two eminent scholars of international relations. Firstly, Mr. Vinod Subramanian, he's an associate fellow with a geopolitical risk analysis firm. Welcome to the Federal, Vinod. And we are also joined by Shubhanshu Pratim. He's a research scholar who is joining us from Guwahati. So welcome to the show, gentlemen. So let me begin the program by asking Vinod a very fundamental question. Vinod, the Indo-US relationship has gone through a lot, and the research analysis and the joint statement paper also has highlighted the strategic partnership, how it has actually undergone change over the years. Could you elaborate a little on this?
Thank you, Siddharth, for first of all having me over. So I would like to say, with respect to the India-US geopolitical relations, I believe we can divide this into three stages. First is a normal, let's say, a Duronto Express, where there were certain developments, but it was slow. Then comes the phase of Vande Bharat, where now we are on track and it's going properly. Now we need, I believe, Indo-US relations, the geostrategic relations stage is entering the bullet train phase, where there are going to be rapid developments for both the countries, across the globe. And specifically talking about this, I think there was a reference to the Quad and enlargement of Quad and, its objectives. And I believe next year, there could be a possibility when the Quad summit is being held in India. I believe it's going to be held in sometime in January. There could be a Quad +1 initiative, and the +1 could be South Korea or any other country. And the next major development is, in fact, regarding the security of West Asia, which is also an area that is going to be focused upon in the coming days.
Okay, so if I can get Mr. Sharma into the program. Mr. Sharma, the joint declaration, I was studying the joint declaration in the morning. It had a substantial, or rather a significant portion on the Quad, as Vinod rightly pointed as well. So, how do we read into it, especially when we see that G20 Global Summit is taking place in India, and when the bilateral is happening, in the sidelines of the summit, and especially a grouping such as Quad comes up. What do we read into it? What are the fine prints?
Thank you, Siddharth. So if I look at your question from an analytical perspective, I can see that the joint statement has quite an overhang of the Quad. So if you look at certain points that the joint statement makes, first of all, it talks about commitment to Indo-Pacific. That's the very basic of the Quad. Then you go, there's a specific paragraph, especially on the Quad, irrespective of other elements, that specifically talks about US and India's joint collaboration on the Quad. That is quite apparent. But when you dig deeper, you see certain facets which directly correlates to the statements that the leaders made during the previous Quad summits. So if I take certain points, firstly, they talk about critical and emerging tech. So if you look at Quad statements, they talk about a group on critical and emerging tech. That's a growing concern of the Quad countries. Then if you look at, the semiconductor supply chains, that's another theme that has been explored in the previous Quad statements that have been made from all the Quad countries. Then you go to quantum exchange computing. That is another area where Quad has already talked about. So you can see that many points that have been raised in this joint statement have already been talked about in the Quad. Then you come to something very specific. It talks about the master ship repair agreement in this joint statement, which directly correlates to India's or India-US growing role in the Indo-Pacific or the Indian Ocean, where they are trying to balance the Chinese influence. So this particular agreement is also comes from that sort of diplomacy or the chain of thoughts. Then you also come to something very specific that the joint statement mentions. It talks about that US will play the role of a co-lead in the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative's Trade and Maritime Support Program. So that is directly, and you can clearly understand that comes from the Quad, because Quad's the latest summit talked about the maritime system awareness, that they will talk about those things. It also talked about the domain awareness, and also talked about the infrastructure partnership that the Quad countries are going to take on the overhang of Build Back Better World that had come from G7. So you can see that this whole structure, in fact, climate change, when India-US talk about climate change, it has a significant overhang of Quad, because Quad also talked about QCHAM, where it was a huge understanding about the India's coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. So that has come along in this discussion. So we have always seen that since 2017, when Quad took off from in its second bird, we have seen that there has been significant movement in the India-US relationship also. So the both complements each other. Quad complements India-US relationship. India-US relationship also complements Quad. And in the G20 perspective, I think it's a major statement. It's a statement because China is not coming. So in this context, if we see these words, if we read between the lines, we see certain dominant narratives emerging in the global politics and also India-US relationship. Thank you.
I was to take Mr. Sharma's point forward. Obviously, what we can understand is that obviously China has not, the Chinese president has not come for the G20 meeting. So is it an attempt? Is it an attempt to show that other groupings they're countering China in a very elemental way? So is that an attempt?
See, India has always stayed away from any sort of a, let's say, alliance or grouping, specifically with respect to any other country. But here, of course, China has not attended, I mean, their president has not attended the G20 summit, and there are many reasons for it. And
Right.
of course, I mean, one of them being that China is not the central player in the G20. There are other countries, and now India has taken the lead. It's the New Delhi summit, and India has taken the lead as far as the global south or any other matter for that matter. For example, there's the Chennai high-level principles on the blue economy or the Deccan principles on food security. These have been mentioned in today's New Delhi declaration. So China has not been at the center.
Right. Right.
So one of the reasons why I believe they have, let's say, not attached so much importance to this year's G20 summit as compared to, let's say, their dominance over BRICS or any other Shanghai Cooperation Organization where they have a direct lead. And yes, I would attribute these reasons also. I mean, there are other reasons which I've come to know, like regarding President Xi's,
Right.
security arrangements, etc. But that's again not relevant to the debate now.
Right. Now, coming back to G20 summit per se, how will the outcomes of the G20 leaders summit further advance the goals of the advanced economies? How do you think, whatever comes out today, there was this comprehensive statement. So how do you think the outcomes will, further deepen the play?
Right. So one thing, I mean, as I've already told you regarding India's leadership in this particular New Delhi declaration is out there. And, the membership of the African Union in the G20 is the first major achievement. Then there are various other initiatives, such as the Jaipur Declaration on International Trade. Then you have the Deccan Principles on food security, as I mentioned. Then the Chennai high-level principles, which again, Prime Minister Narendra Modi mentioned in his article just before the summit. It's been published across major newspapers. So these are some of the important initiatives. And most importantly, I think what has been a diplomatic success for India is the fact that this New Delhi declaration has been agreed upon by all the countries. I mean, this was unexpected. Like many analysts did say that this was not expected. And I think this has been the major, one key achievement in this entire summit.
Okay. Mr. Sharma, what are the other big takeaways from the Biden-Modi bilateral?
I think let me first answer the G20 question also. I feel that, as Binod has said, that there's been significant skepticism earlier that because China is not coming, because the Ukraine overhang is there was significant concerns that joint statement might not be achieved in this New Delhi declaration might not be achieved. So the Sherpas were working day and night, and all those complications are there. In fact, there was a panel day before yesterday when I was a part of, and political representatives from the other parties said that this might be a setback of this diplomacy. But this very fact that they have been able to achieve 100% consensus on this, on human-centric development, on the elements that Mr. Modi had spoken about, on the fact that there were pillars which were specifically about bringing down the high table diplomacy to the masses, to the global south, to the women, to the human-centric development, bringing the 40. So that is, I think, the biggest achievement, bringing the subaltern to this G20 perspective, if I may put it this way. And coming to your other question about the Biden summit, there were strategic points, as Binod has also said. There were other points about climate change. There were points about deep collaboration on space, as we have seen after the success of Chandrayaan-3 and the Aditya L1, there have been significant interest. Of course, there have been going on, but currently there's significant interest in India's space tech and also growing collaboration between NASA and other parts of the world. So that space technology aspect is very important because we had already seen how space can be at some point maybe utilized as a domain of not warfare, but strategically it might be utilized. So India-US collaboration or information sharing on that could be really significant. If you look at some other elements, also quantum exchange, the talks about the sort of semiconductor supply chain. So all these initiatives, human rights, all these issues are there. But the point is, we see that India and US have moved past those differences of the past. If there is some disagreement, they have been able to gloss over that in the idea, in the spirit that these two countries need to collaborate. This is the time for them to collaborate in this global dynamic, whatever is happening around the globe. And this relationship is going to be really fundamental. And these points raised in the joint statement prove towards that understanding, because despite party differences, despite comments, despite congressional hearings, we see that the joint statement reflects the commitment, the shared understanding of the issues, the interests, and the values also. It's not that it's not value-laden or it's devoid of values. Values are there. Values are about common interests. Values are about safeguarding this Indo-Pacific region, safeguarding the partnership, safeguarding the free world. So I think those things are reflected in this joint statement, and that we need to take care of. And also there's a humanistic perspective that needs to be understood.
Okay.
Siddharth, I would just like to add one more point here.
Yeah, sure, Vinod, please go ahead.
One important outcome of this G20 summit that you're asking me about is the fact I think we all missed, which is agreement on Ukraine. I think this is a real achievement, that the fact that the New Delhi Declaration has agreed upon certain key points regarding Ukraine, which even like the Bali Declaration had missed out. This is the first time, I think, in this entire G20 groupings after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we have had an agreement on Ukraine, which is basically adherence to Article 1 of the UN Charter and various other points. Basically, it reflects the Prime Minister's point that the 21st century is not the century of war. It's basically, we need to move forward with cooperation, and it's the era of diplomacy and talks. This has been reflected in the New Delhi Declaration.
Just one point I would
like to make. So the apprehension that was, please.
Just one additional point I would like to make regarding the Quad thing. I forgot to mention that going forward, this India-US relationship might result in more minilaterals that we need to keep a close eye on, because Quad had resulted in I2U2. And also recently we saw how Greece, Israel, Cyprus, and India had come together for another. So this concept of minilaterals has gone, new avatar, and also the Quad plus understanding might go deeper with the help of India-US partnership. So that we need to look forward.
Okay. Vinod, I think Mr. Sharma raised a very, very important point, and Prime Minister has been actually stressing on it, over the past few months and leading up to the G20 summit, is the human-centric development. So how do we actually ensure this equitable human-centric development? It looks a great idea, but when it comes to implementation, the formulation, especially in the developing parts of the world, how do we ensure that equitable human-centric growth?
See, there have been achievements, and then there are challenges as we move forward in this regard. So, like if you see one thing, India has launched, for example, the International Solar Alliance, of which I think most of the Global South, they're members of this organization. And then we also, I think, Subhranshu had already mentioned the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. That's another initiative. So, like India has spearheaded various initiatives now, like, in the recent past. But I mean, the oft-repeated, challenge with respect to these initiatives is the lack of financing. And that I don't think, even if you see during the climate change talks, we have not been able to achieve any major breakthrough in this regard. But I mean, there's one thing in the New Delhi Declaration now. I think there's been a reference to debt financing and basically of nations such as Sri Lanka. So this is one of the, I think, talks that have been there. And yes, the Prime Minister in his article did mention that we cannot leave behind anyone. And sustainable development is the way forward. I mean, in terms of the SDG goals of the 17 goals and 17 principles and 169 goals. It is a challenge, if you ask me, moving forward. India has had a mixed record in this regard, and it will be a challenge forward, but nothing is impossible.
That's right. Vinod, coming up to this, this another important, rather very, very important declaration in the joint statement. Biden has actually reaffirmed his support for a reformed UN Security Council with India as the permanent member. So how is this likely to play out in future? First, you can answer that question, and then Mr. Sharma can maybe provide his inputs. Yeah, this is actually a very, very big development. Yeah.
See, it is a big development today, but US has always been an ally of India in the sense they've always supported India's candidature, the permanent candidature in the UN Security Council. But I would question its efficiency. See, even the Prime Minister has also stated this, and the External Affairs Ministers also stated this, that the UNSC is basically, it reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945. We are right now in 2023, and it is basically, if it fails to reform itself, it's going to become an obsolete organization. So, yes, I don't see much hopes if you ask me, but this is, what is that?
So if you're asking me this question, I would say that the UNSC debate has been going on for a long time, that we have always read it in our textbooks to the current discussions that India should be a part of this, so-and-so country should be a part of this. There have been several inner groupings coming up to lobby for each other. Regarding US, if you remember, the earlier visits also, President Obama had also talked about India's, he had said very clearly that India should be a part of the reformed UNSC, United Nations Security Council. But if you look at the realities, of course, that's my personal view. It feels good. It gives us a sort of symbolic gesture, sort of all that. But if you look at the real world issues today, the toothless tiger that UN is at present, including the UNSC. So I'm very doubtful that whether this sort of thing would really give us any sort of appeal beyond the theatrics or beyond the photo ops. So I think that's another point. But of course, at the same time, it is true that gives credence to the perspective that national importance has increased, India's strategic powers has increased. But we need to keep in mind that there are other powers also who need to want to get into it. There are powers who don't want India to get into it. And they might have veto, they might have other instruments to do that, they might have other allies to do that. So those realities need to be kept on mind. And I think we should not obsessively talk about UNSC, seat in terms of something really that we need to work towards. Of course, we can keep working towards it, but it's not something which, because at present G20, G7, there are other platforms coming in, multilaterals coming in. We have different forums. We have BRICS, SCO, this, that. So amidst that, I don't think UN has today that sort of a relevance which had at that point of time. And even with a permanent seat, I'm not sure what far India can achieve. But of course, as a diplomatic perspective, we can work towards that. But that's not something that really bring great laurels to India. That's my personal view.
See, I would also like to add one more point, Siddharth, here. Is India
sure.
India is already the leader of the global south. The recent summit in January, saw the participation of more than 150 countries. And if you see India's, initiatives such as the Vaccine Maitri, we have provided vaccines to over 150 countries. And as Subhranshu has pointed out, we are already part of many organizations such as, let's say, even the Quad, the G20, or even the BRICS, and, also the minilateral, which is now in news, which is the I2U2 initiative. As I had mentioned to you in the beginning of this program, we are about to launch a rail agreement in West Asia, along with the US and other countries. So yes, I agree with Subhranshu that we could question the relevance of UNSC.
Speaking to us and shedding light on the very, very important bilateral between the India and the US. Thanks once again.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.